The presenting partner of today's episode is Sexton Speakers, Australia's leading speakers bureau. At Sexton, they know that the right speaker can be the most powerful part of any event, leaving a lasting impression that sticks with your audiences long after the final applause. With decades of experience, Sexton's team will match you with your perfect speaker, MC, or entertainer to elevate your event, delivering energy, insight, and inspiration like no else. Partner with Sexton and give your audience an experience they'll never forget.
We live in a world of abundance. There is never a need for another anything. And I think you've got to be very, very clear with yourself. When you make a decision like we're going to make gin, you don't have a big idea. You are making a decision. And one of the things you've got to do is figure out, do I have an edge? Do I have an angle that makes this decision a good one?
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change.
Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Our guest today is a leader whose journey has redefined craft gin, brand storytelling, and the spirit of entrepreneurship itself. Matt Jones is the co-founder of 4 Pillars Gin. Matt's path is as unique as the brands he has helped shape. From a start as a political advisor in the UK to his role as a brand strategist, Matt has helped build 4 Pillars into one of the most celebrated gin brands in Australia and beyond. 4 Pillars Gin is a household name and an international favourite, known not just for its quality gin, but for a customer experience that is as thoughtful as it is memorable. It is my favourite gin, and when you visit the distillery in the Yarra Valley, the service you will receive is truly memorable. Now, consider that the gin market is flooded with many options. Matt shares with us what makes 4 Pillars stand out. He shares the deep understanding of the customer journey and a culture that empowers every team member to be a brand ambassador and feel like an owner, which enables them to bring passion and authenticity to each customer experience. Matt brings a unique perspective to leadership. He believes that the key to great leadership lies in crafting clarity from ambiguity, and his approach at 4 Pillars has done just that. For Matt, a compelling leader doesn't just act decisively. They slow down to clarify purpose. They inspire ownership and frame a clear, purposeful story that rallies people around a shared vision. Whether you're a leader, a marketer, or simply curious about how great brands are built, Matt's insight are sure to leave you very inspired. So grab yourself a glass of 4 Pillars Gin. My favourite is the Shiraz. Settle in and join us for this insightful conversation with the wonderful Matt Jones. Well, hello, Matt Jones. Welcome to Future Fit Podcast. Great to have you on. How are you this morning?
Sadhna, I'm really well. Nice to be here.
Now, I have to confess straight up that the 4 Pillars Gin is the only gin that sits on my shelf. And for anyone who doesn't...
Same here.
Well, I hope so for you. And anyone who doesn't know who you are the co-founder of the 4 Pillars Gin, which is located here in Melbourne in the Yarra Valley, isn't it?
That's correct. In beautiful Healesville, about 50 minutes outside of Melbourne CBD. And couldn't be a better place in the world to make gin.
I've been there for the tastings. My kids took me there for a birthday one year and I had a wonderful time tasting. I didn't know you could taste gin like the way you do. So it was a great experience.
It's actually something we Well, it's two things. I mean, one, because we only make gin and we make this incredible diversity of gin, it's really important to us to show off just how extraordinary gin can be and how many different things gin can be. But also, we do have to sort of teach people how to taste and eat gin, because you're right, we don't tend to sort of slug gin down as a shot. And so there's a little bit of an art to sort of getting I guess that the high sort of proof of the alcohol out of your palate and out of the way, so then you can really let those flavors unfold. So yeah, it's a bit of a party trick we teach everyone who visits.
Well, I learned it and I still use it. But before we talk about the 4 pillars journey, I do want to step back a little bit, because you've had a somewhat of an eclectic career. So you trained as an economist, you worked as a political advisor, and then went on to become a brand strategist and then co-founder of 4 pillars. But I want to start with your time as a political advisor to the Conservative Party in the UK. You were the youngest person in the party's history to hold that role at the age of 27. What was that experience like?
In hindsight, surreal. But it is strange when you reflect on how you get to a role, and then your question is, what was it like to be there? So I'd sort of got there again with a bit of a sort of an eclectic and winding path. I actually trained as an economist, but that was my university degree. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that degree, and my macroeconomics professor in my final year, he said, look, I want to put you forward for something. And what he was putting me forward for was the Government Economic Service. So effectively, it was the UK government's fast stream, but specifically for economists. And you would apply for that, but then you just get placed into a department. And I got placed into the defense intelligence staff. So I went to work in military intelligence as an economic analyst, and that was fascinating. I wasn't a very good economist. I was also, it seemed to me, the only economist in the building, because most of the people were deep subject matter experts on everything from Russian tank movements to, what's going on in the geopolitical environment of Iran and Iraq, and how stable or unstable is region X or Y, and how likely is that general over there to sort of start a coup. And it was extraordinary. And so you're surrounded by these incredibly intelligent people in my department, and then spreading around Whitehall, meeting all of these remarkably smart, informed people in the Treasury and the Foreign Office and the Home Office and so on. And very quickly it became clear to me that I didn't have the technical knowledge set or the technical skill set to compete, but there was something I did quite well, which was I was quite good at seeing the big picture and sort of articulating the story of what was going on. And I spent a couple of years doing that. I ended up doing some extraordinary things, getting quite involved in the UK government's response to the war in Kosovo, because I became one of the few people who could find Kosovo on a map when it seemed important to be able to find Kosovo on a map. But then along the way, I met an Australian girl. I came and spent 12 months living in and falling in love with both the girl and the country and the city of Sydney, where I now make my home. So when we went back to London, I had to find a job. And instead of going back into the civil service, I went into politics, as you said. And first of all, I went in as a policy advisor, a policy analyst, very detail-oriented role. Turned out something else I wasn't very good at. So sort of leaning on this apparent skill set I had, but it wasn't really the skill set that was truly world-class. That was sort of yet to emerge. And I got attached to the transport brief. And so I started to, this was the Conservative Party was in opposition. For those who followed UK politics, these were the dark days of William Hague and Ian Duncan Smith. And the Conservative Party probably hadn't recognized at that time that it had what you and I might see as a brand problem, that it had a perception problem. It still thought, and generally parties do this, and it's something really interesting for everyone listening to watch out for when you see a party leave office, sort of rejected from office, that their first instinct is to blame policy. So they go, well, people didn't vote for us because they didn't like our policies enough, because that's a nice rational explanation, because you can fix policy. You can just create new ones. So I went into Ian Duncan Smith's policy unit. I was supposed to be working on transport policy. As I said, I wasn't very good at that, but I was quite good at finding things wrong with what the government was doing, the Labour government of the day. That was the Blair Brown government at the time. I was quite good at picking holes in what they were doing. They've made these promises on railways. They haven't fulfilled them. They've said they're going to do this on roads, but actually I've done a bunch of research and it turns out they haven't. And so I started to be someone very good at crafting talking points for Prime Minister's questions, that incredibly famous bit of theatre in UK politics. So I got asked to move roles, and quite quickly I became a speechwriter. First of all, I started writing all the economic speeches for the party. Then I started writing all the speeches for the party chair, who at the time was Theresa May, for the party leadership. And that then led to the role that you talked about, becoming the chief political advisor on the party's communications. And around that time, I think we started also to try and convince the party that maybe the issue is not policy. Maybe it's actually communication, maybe it's brand, maybe it's persuasion, maybe it's perception. And in some ways, my career ever since then has been the same, working with very, very clever people, sometimes people with a big ego, as people who get to the top of politics can have, and saying to them, look, I understand the rational case you want to make, but unless we frame that rational case with the right storytelling, with the right language, unless we put the right literal and sort of figurative packaging around it, I'm not sure people are going to buy that rational case. And I don't think that has then changed as I've moved from politics into brand and then into the world of gin. But it was an extraordinary learning experience, often incredibly exciting, sometimes slightly toxic and exhausting and draining, as you can imagine politics is, but not something you would ever replace.
No. Now, talking about politics, they say never talk politics, but I'm going to go there. Talking about, the branding, the communication piece, the connection piece. It's interesting watching the US politics play out because you've got such polar opposites playing out, that exactly what you've just spoken about. And yet it's, according to the polls, and I don't know how much credit you put into these polls, it all seems to be neck and neck. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it is the perfect lesson for every leader, every CEO, anyone who works in business or frankly, who works in an environment that they would like to believe is rational. And it's a very important life lesson for all of us in that way. So let's step back from the question. Your vote should be the most rational decision you make every 3 or 4 or 5 years. You are casting this single vote. You are sort of involved in this single transaction. You are spending this single dollar that you are given by the democratic process. And with that, you are choosing the person, the people, the government who will frame the economy, your healthcare, your education, your safety, your foreign policy. Like, you should be interrogating absolutely everything about that decision. You should be researching the detail. You should be making this highly rational choice about who will be best for me, my family, my future, my values. And you and I both know, and everyone listening knows, that's not how we vote. We vote for parties because that's my tribe. We vote for people because I could imagine having a beer with him. We don't vote for her because I don't like the sound of her voice. We have all these terribly superficial, completely irrational reasons that nudge us towards a vote that often, and this gets to your question, is completely against our self-interest. So you can see in the US, Donald Trump has built a coalition of people who support him, which is now very close to 50% of the US electorate, the majority of whose interests are not by definition served by Donald Trump. Even if we were speaking to a room full of people who rationally were supporters of Donald Trump's politics and policies, I would be absolutely confident in saying 80% of the people who vote for him are not like you, are people who actively suffer in terms of their economic, their prosperity and their prospects because of his policies. And yet he has managed to build a tribalism, a sense of identity around him. And so, you hear that phrase a lot, identity politics. But I think, if we zoom out from politics and extract the lesson, it's that never believe that your role can be achieved or success can be achieved in your role as rationally as you would like. Whether you are growing a business or whether you are a leader trying to bring people with you, whatever it is you're trying to do, you will typically reach for logic. And what politics teaches us is we have to reach for emotion, we have to reach for identity, we have to bring in storytelling, we have to command language, we have to appeal to people's guts and their hearts as well as their heads. And that's not to dismiss the importance of rational value. It's not to say that there's no such thing as a product that is better or a piece of technology built on a superior algorithm or indeed a policy that is better for a country. But being better alone is not what makes us successful. And I think that's what politics teaches us. And it continues to sort of play that lesson out as we watch what's happening in the US right now.
Let's move away from politics and let's go to why we are here talking, which is the 4 Pillars Gin story. You went from all of that experience into co-founding 4 Pillars. What's the story behind that? And I'm fascinated about the name. Why that particular name?
Well, I've worked in brand for a long time as a strategist. I actually joined a brand experience firm in 2006 when, after my 4 years in politics, it was time to come home, or what was going to become home for me, to Sydney. And I shifted career from political strategy to brand strategy. And for a long time, I worked for a fantastic agency, first here in Australia, and then I moved to the US and took on a global role. And their focus was really brand experience, helping brands come to life and helping brands behave in the world. And I think that was particularly important because I was doing that at the same time as the digital, mobile, and social revolutions were taking place. And so how brands showed up, how they behaved, thinking of your brand much more as a verb rather than just going, well, what are the adjectives that describe our brand, and let's put that in a nice TV ad, but actually going, what does our brand do? And that was really the focus of the agency that I was involved in. I moved back to Australia after having a child and set up my own consultancy and started to work more on primary brand strategy and brand purpose. And the piece of that I always hated the most was naming. Naming is hard. And you think about brand names, there's very rarely such a thing as a good brand name. You know, brands that we all know really well. Tesla, it's the name of a dead scientist that some people have heard of. Google is a misspelling of a big number. Facebook was the Facebook before they revised to slice off the. And Facebook, objectively, that sounds like a really bad name if you're over in a brainstorm. And yet now it just sort of flows through our brains quite frictionlessly. The wonderful Canva started out as Canvas Chef. Quite a bad name. Canva turned out to be a better name. And so if you then sort of, your two questions, like how did the gin come about and how did the name come about? I was running this consultancy, and a very early lunch that I took just from someone who hit me up on LinkedIn was with this guy called Stuart Gregor. And Stu was running an incredible PR firm, public relations firm in the food and drink and lifestyle space called Liquid Ideas. He was quite a visionary in terms of the role of earned media. He'd come out of the wine industry and he'd seen that Australia made really some of the world's best wine, but often didn't tell its story as well as it should, and didn't sort of stand as tall and as proud as it should on the world stage. And so he went, okay, well, I'm going to try and solve that by setting up a public relations firm that helps initially wine brands, hence the name Liquid Ideas, really tell their stories well. And so his agency had blossomed. He's extraordinary. His wife, Sally Lewis, was also in the business, incredibly talented former journalist and writer and expert in food and wine. And he said, well, why don't you come and help me out a bit and do some consulting? And by the way, I've got some spare desks in my office, come and move in. So he and I become very fast friends. We become colleagues. One day he said, oh, you should meet my mate Cam. Cam and I have been sort of playing around with making wine often. Cam's still in the wine industry. And we're sort of toying with this business idea. And we think maybe we need a third partner in the mix. And so we have dinner. In hindsight, I realized that was probably a test for me. Cameron's got a very sensitive bullshit meter. And I think he was probably going, okay, is this the kind of marketing guy I can't work with, or maybe the kind that I can hold my nose and can work with? And I must have passed the test, because later on in 2012, we started to develop the plans to create 4 pillars. And of course, as you create a brand, at some stage, you have to put a name on it.
Name to it.
And we were very clear that we needed to launch properly, again, to sort of answer a question that you haven't asked, but I think it's an important part of the context. Even back then, the world did not need another gin. You know,
well, it was actually going to be my funny you said, my next question, because, and I'm going to tie it in. I don't know how many people have gone into a gin bar, but I have, because I love my gin. And when you have a look at the shelf, it is an overly crowded space.
It's overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And even in 2012, the gin shelf, the gin wall bay in Dan Murphy's was overwhelming. Yeah. And it was overwhelming, but there was something missing. And what was missing was Australian gin. There was really almost no presence of Australian gin. There are a few people having a crack. No one had really punched through into any form of sort of mainstream consciousness. And to be frank, I don't think anyone was losing sleep at night thinking, if only we had an Australian gin. It wasn't like there were, bartenders in all the world's best bars going, it's Australian botanicals I need in my gin for that martini. I think if you'd asked the world and the world could have responded, it had said, we have enough gin, thank you. And I think in many ways that is true of most categories. We live in a world of abundance. There is never a need for another anything. And I think you've got to be very, very clear with yourself. When you make a decision like, we're going to make gin, you don't have a big idea. you are making a decision. And one of the things you've got to do is figure out, do I have an edge? Do I have an angle that makes this decision a good one? Am I making a better something, a different something? Am I making something for someone who is currently underserved? And we can talk more about this, but why this is relevant to the naming is we went, well, the starting point of bringing a gin into a world that is already awash with gin is this has to be of the utmost quality, and it has to be of absolute commitment to making the most of the opportunities of making gin here in Australia. So Cameron went and really focused on what could Australian botanicals and Australian produce bring to the world of gin. He and Stu went on a fact-finding mission to the US, and they came back and they went, okay, this is a good idea. We've got to make Australian gin, and we have to make it in a particular type of still, a Rolls-Royce gin making machine from Germany, made by a company called Carl. And the good news was it's going to be the first one in Australia. It's going to be, immediately we're going to have this great advantage. We have the best gin making equipment. I mean, a still is just like a very big, expensive kettle. We have the best still in Australia. The bad news, they're very expensive, and it's going to take about 12 months from ordering to get our still, Wilma, we named her after Cameron's late mum, to get Wilma into the country and up and running. And so that gave Cameron time to go and buy the chemistry lab still. And he was distilling away of lemon myrtle and pepperberry and the wattle family, and trying to understand, okay, what can Australian botanicals add to the canvas of botanicals that make up gin? Because gin is just juniper plus whatever you want. If there's no juniper, it's just weird vodka. But once there's juniper, you have gin, and then you get to play. Meanwhile, Stu and I were briefing in brand and label design, and again, this commitment to quality from the outset. We said, okay, well, we need a custom bottle. So we worked with a small design agency called War, created a beautiful custom bottle. We wanted to create something that felt really timeless. We were in this for the long run. We didn't want to create something that felt very on trend in 2013, 2014, and that would have dated fast. And we wanted the same for the label. And we chose this beautiful kind of black and copper aesthetic, which the copper kind of mirrored the copper on Wilma the still. And of course, the dreaded question comes to you from the design agency: what's it called? And Stu said, just call it Four Pillars. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And it turned out Four Pillars was it was a name that was in the back of Stu's mind. It was actually a drinking game that he and Cameron used to play in the wine industry. If they were sitting at a really boring wine dinner, they'd look around the room and they'd start to divide the room up into what they called the four pillars of humanity. And there was one pillar you didn't want to be put into. And so that was the unofficial but sort of true story. For me, I quite liked Four Pillars for a couple of reasons. One, it wasn't too long. And I know that sounds like the world's most tactical thing to say, but so much of business, so much of leadership is tactics. Choose a long name, and you're going to be making that font really small on every piece of packaging. You've got this sort of beautiful, long, lyrical name, and then you're trying to get it on a bottle. It's not going to fit. Four Pillars was quite narrow, quite tall. But then the wonderful thing for us is that Four Pillars became a philosophy. And we said, okay, well, Four Pillars is about doing a few things really well. It's about focus. It's about craft. We're launching this first gin. Cameron's finally perfected the recipe. Wilma's shown up. He's put all the botanicals in the still. He's chosen to use whole fresh oranges to give it this great Australian aromatic lift that you just couldn't do in the UK. And we said, okay, well, what are the four pillars of this gin, rare dry gin? We said, well, it's the botanicals, it's the still we've used, it's the Yarra Valley water, and it's the love. And then every gin we launched from there, we said, well, what are the four pillars of this? And it became this rhythm of communication and this sense of framing of stories that we told. So what I always sort of reflect on in hindsight is that Four Pillars was a name that was not objectively a bad name, because it sounded quite nice. It sounded sort of interesting, didn't have much baggage attached to it. It wasn't too long. And then we turned it over time into a good name, not because we attached one very sort of powerful story. It wasn't sort of, my father was an adventurer and was in the jungle and came across this recipe, not a silly sort of literal story, but instead it was just a framework that we could use to create value over time. And so I think Four Pillars has become a name that stands for something rather than a name that is the beginning of a short, silly story, which often a lot of brands sort of are looking for. They're looking for the name to solve everything. Whereas for us, really, the name Four Pillars just became almost a window that we created that you could look through and we could tell you what was going on behind that window.
Were those the elements that you use to become such a recognizable brand, not just in Australia, but worldwide?
I think there's a lot of discussion at the moment about recognizability and distinctiveness in the world of brand. And if you spend more than about 10 minutes with a marketing or brand strategist, you'll hear about the importance of distinctive brand assets. And it is true, right? It is true that it is useful to build up these sort of mental memory frameworks that I heard this from someone. Most of the wisdom that I have, most of the wisdom that I've managed to or tried to capture in the book I've written about this, Lessons from Gin, it's probably borrowed from someone else. When you're building a brand, you're trying to build a little piece of real estate in people's minds. You're trying to sort of create these memory structures. You're trying to create this relationship that goes beyond the rational. And of course, it helps if there are distinctive elements that you can draw on to do that. However, you and I also know plenty of brands with very distinctive elements that have lost that relationship with people. I remember when I was a brand strategist in the late 2000s, before we entered the 2010s, one of my first clients was Ford. The blue oval would have been one of the most distinctive brand assets in Australia, but you could throw a rock in a crowded room and not hit anyone who wanted to buy a Ford at that time. Ford was really struggling. And so I think there is something about the difference between distinctiveness and desire, for example. So yes, we use things like the very distinct bottle, the fact that we had a custom bottle molded where you have these 4 tactile dots. So if you pick up a bottle of 4 Pillars, you can kind of tell it's a bottle of 4 Pillars almost instantly. There's elements of the design on the label, the way we have this sort of consistent frame. And although we really play with our labels and do quite creative things, there's some very, very distinctive elements. There's the distinctiveness that comes from the fact that we only make gin. We are not a confused business. We are not wondering whether we're really a whiskey or a vodka or a rum business. As some distilleries are. Good luck to them. They would define the business they're in as distilling, and they are doing lots of things in distilling. We're much more focused with the business we're in. We're gin makers. So there's lots of things that are consistent and are distinctive about 4 Pillars. But I'd say the answer to your question actually is more about the way that 4 Pillars has carried itself in the world and the decisions it's made that have then allowed us to tell stories and create experiences, and particularly build homes that have embodied that way of being. And I think it's actually that ethos and that spirit of 4 Pillars and the things we've done because of it that have probably created whatever fame 4 Pillars has probably come from that. And then those distinctive assets, those distinctive design elements have helped reinforce that, but they probably weren't the cause, if that makes sense.
I want to pick up on, you mentioned your book, Lessons from Gin. Awesome title. I haven't read it yet, but I will get it to read it. Now, there are 4 key themes in your book when I was doing some research around it, which is thinking, creating, sharing, and growing, which I love the titles of those. But I want to dig into some of that with you and start with the thinking piece. How important is it for leaders in particular to create the compelling and clear visions for their teams? Because we talk about this a lot, as leaders, you've got to have a very clear vision for people to follow you on your journey, and you've got to have a purpose-led business. And they're all great terminologies, but I'd love to hear your commentary around, and maybe link it back to what you do at 4 Pillars, is how important is that compelling purpose-led vision? And then how often do you change it? Because something you created 10 years ago may not be relevant in today's world.
100%. I mean, so much to talk about there. And you referenced terminology, and is it just me, or does terminology just often get in our way? And we're we're wrestling with, what's the difference between a vision and an ambition? And what's the difference between our mission and our purpose? And you have to sort of try and sort of reboot that conversation and say, well, do we have clarity? Because the whole sort of central notion behind the first of those 4 big sections of the book, this idea of thinking about business really clearly, is to sort of try and place value in one thing, and also to remind us that we place a bit too much value in another thing. So the thing I think we need to place more value in is clarity. Are we clear? Are we clear that we're about to make a decision, whether that decision is to start a business, or whether we are leaders in a well-established business and the decision is a particular product or a particular initiative, or whatever it may be? Do we know enough to be confident this is the right decision? What more data could we gather? How does this decision fit into our strategy? Is our strategy clearly articulated? The why behind what we do? Do we understand what value we create in the world, who we create that value for? Do we understand what it is we do to create that value? So I talk a lot about purpose and craft, not because I'm particularly hung up on that terminology, but I know what I mean when I talk about that, and I try and take people on the journey. And for me, understanding your purpose is really understanding why your business needs to exist, what value it creates that people would find hard to replace. I sometimes talk about the notion of being mournable, that you want to build a business that if you sort of sent out the press release and said we're closing our doors, people wouldn't just sort of shrug and go, well, that's annoying. Now I've got to change my bank. Now I've got to port my number from that telco to that telco. Things that would be irritating, but we wouldn't think twice about it. We wouldn't mourn it. We don't have a really strong relationship with those service providers. We want to build businesses that would be mourned, where people would go, I don't know what I'm going to do without that. Now that's a hard position to get to in people's lives, but wouldn't it be great if we could target that? And maybe that would focus us a bit more on what it is uniquely that we do, what value we uniquely, specifically create. And that then leads to that second notion of craft. Well, what is it that we do really well that gives us the right to create that value? I've always been really inspired by the story of Knudstorp, a guy called Knudstorp. He was the first non-family CEO of Lego. And it's interesting, whenever you listen to interviews with him as a Dane, he calls it Lego, which I find very challenging. So I grew up with Lego, but anyway, he calls it Lego. We'll go with Lego for this podcast. And he talks about the fact that when he joined Lego, they had become really, really focused, arguably distracted by the digital revolution, and going, well, we are purpose-wise, we're in the business of play. We're a play business. We are a creativity business. Writing Lego's purpose would have been relatively easy. But in terms of them, well, what is it does? What's its craft? Where does it need to focus? A lot of people at Lego were focused on things that were not physical. They were looking at the gaming revolution, the digital revolution. And he said, we had lost sight that the thing that makes Lego so special is the magic of two pieces that you put them together and it's like they're glued, but a 2-year-old can take them apart. And he sort of goes on to say, and he said, well, to do that takes millimeters, micrometers of precision. And you're trying to do that over tens of billions of pieces every year in tens of thousands of different configurations. And you have to make sure that the mold is right every time, that every piece in every box is right every time, that when a Harry Potter film comes out, within 6 months, the model of that is at the right dock for the right Walmart depot in the right state of America. So managing the supply chain from precision molding through to delivering those kits, he's like, that's our secret sauce. That's Lego. And if we focus on doing that better than anyone else, we are untouchable. So his thing was understanding that the Lego brick and the business system around the brick was actually their craft. Their purpose was absolutely around play and creativity. And the relationship between those two was what makes Lego so magical. And so for me, we can get caught up in all this terminology, but understanding your purpose, understanding your craft, and then really thinking clearly about how you are going to grow. And that's really what strategy is then. It's going, what are the decisions that we will make? What are the things we will choose to do? What are the things we will choose not to do? What are the things we will try to be the best in the world at? What are the areas where we will let our competitors be the best? Giving your competitors space to win is part of strategy, because it's choosing where you're going to win. And so if you then have that clearly in your mind as a leader, your purpose, your craft, your growth theory, your strategy, then I think the last piece where thinking translates into action. And the thing I talked at the start of this answer about something we sometimes place too much value in. I think we sometimes place too much value in action, not at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, action is all that counts, but at the start of the day. Sometimes we want to show as leaders that we got this. So we just want to charge forward and say, just follow me. And I'm taking action. Action is strength. Action is momentum. Action is impetus. And actually, there's a confidence and a strength to slowing down and thinking, getting that strategy clear, and then critically turning that strategy into a story. Because I think it's stories that become the really contagious and memorable ways that we articulate our strategy to our teams. And as we're now about to shift into the world of action, and it can't just be us as leaders doing all the action. We need other people to follow that thread, to understand that purpose, understand that craft, understand the theory of how we're going to grow, understand our strategy. Translating that into a simple story that people can digest lets us go into the next phase, which is where we start to do, we start to make, we start to go. But hopefully with that clarity of thinking and that compelling story of thinking fueling us.
I love the story of Lego. I have never thought about it in that way, in terms of the craftsmanship that goes into creating those pieces. And those of us who have kids know how easy it is for kids to put it together and pull it apart. You talk about storytelling, and it's such a critical piece around the branding and the connection to the consumer. But I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, because everything is moving so fast today. The way technology operates, people's expectations, and, I think post-COVID, it's the expectations of our customers has changed so much as well. How good do you need to be today, and how good do your stories need to be to get cut through, to sit on the mind shell of customers in crowded markets, which is what you do at 4Pillars so well?
Look, it's hard. It's hard, and I think, like many sort of quick fix buttons that people want to reach for, there's a button marked storytelling, and they're quite keen to kind of mash that and do better storytelling and do better marketing and tell the world. And I think the starting point for doing it well takes a clarity of thought again. And the first piece, almost even before we get to the what, is really understanding the who. And before everyone listening goes, oh my God, this is motherhood and apple pie, and of course we need to know our audience. There's one thing I think that most of us don't think enough about, which is how many of them do we really need to tell the story to? How big really is the audience that we need, not just to reach, but to affect with our story? There's a wonderful marketing strategist called Seth Godin, and he's written a lot of great books about 21st century marketing. But whenever I think about what would Seth do, what would Seth say here, he would remind us that marketing and storytelling is more effective when we are targeting swimming pools, not oceans. So figuring out what is that smallest viable audience that we could go after and try and infect them with the virus that is our story. Because the critical thing about storytelling actually is the storytelling that is done by other people on our behalf. So what is the minimum viable audience we need to take our story, engage with it, digest it, and start telling it to other people? Before COVID came up, and therefore this stuff, we didn't want to talk about viral marketing, so we didn't want to talk about viruses. But Seth would talk about people sneezing your story. Like, it's sort of that sense of contagion. That's so often how we hear about a cool new restaurant or a cool new something in the world, is through people, family, friends, colleagues, people we know and trust, saying, you've got to try this, you've got to do this. Like, we all know instinctively that's how we discover a lot of the things that become our next great discovery. And yet, as leaders and marketers, often we don't trust in that. Instead, we're trying to pay for that. We're trying to pay, in the old days, for advertising, in these days for performance marketing and social marketing. But actually thinking about, what is the scale of my minimum viable audience? How could I tell my story to them? And what is it that I could do for them that would inspire them to tell my story to other people? And of course, in doing that, you do have to think about, what is the story that I'd like to be told? You have to model the storytelling yourself. You don't want 20 different flavors of your brand story out there that are all kind of in competition with each other. So you do want to think quite carefully. You do want to craft, and this was the second piece of my book, you do want to make sure that you've not just crafted your business, but you've also crafted your brand experience, your brand story optimally, so that people then go out and share the things that you would like them to share. But still, that notion of scale, actually, we talked a lot about at 4Pillars about intimacy. We challenged that idea of the way you chase scale is just being at scale. Instead, we said, well, the way we're going to chase scale, we wanted to be, quite early on, we said we want to be the global benchmark for taking a craft gin business to scale. But we trusted that we would do that through intimacy. We trusted that we would do that through small scale experiences, stories told to small numbers of people that would inspire them to go and tell those stories to their friends and family, and trust in that theory. And I think that theory, to a great extent, played out. But yeah, I think that's a really critical starting point. Who do I need to tell this story to? how can I inspire them to tell my story to others? And what is the ideal story I would like them to be sharing? If you work hard on those pieces, and the same is true internally as well as externally, then I think storytelling has more impact than when we just try and find the megaphone and start yelling our story at everyone before they are ready to hear it, we are ready to tell it, and before it's really ready to spread.
I've heard you say that everybody in your business is a brand builder. Tell me more about this, because it connects in the conversation you've been having around telling the story from an internal perspective, because that is such a challenge for leaders today, where whether you're running a small organization or a large organization, we talk about everybody has to be on the same page and connected to your values and purpose and mission, etc. But there's a difference between understanding it and living it with your customer every day.
Correct. And the answer is in the question, right? Everyone in your business is a brand builder. And to understand why that's the case, you actually need to sort of take a step back and understand that your brand, whatever industry you're in, your brand doesn't exist. It is language, it is made up language. And we needed to make up the language of brand. We needed to make up the terminology because there was something important to describe that can otherwise take a lot of words to describe. But the reason we need the language of brand is because the way we all feel about businesses is not entirely rational. We needed language to help us disentangle our biases from the truth. The truth being all of those providers are the same, and our biases are, but that's the one I buy. That's the one I like. Well, what causes that? And the answer is the brand. The brand is what causes that. So brand is just language we use to describe how we feel about a business. So once you then think of it in those terms, you can't just say that the marketing department is the only department that gets to affect our feelings. Because when you and I walk into a bank and we have a bad experience, or when we get to the airport and find that our flight is cancelled, or we have any form of interaction with any kind of business that is positive or negative, those interactions shape the way we feel about that business. Therefore, those interactions have shaped the brand and the brand's health and the brand's strength. Those interactions were delivered by someone. That someone is managed and compensated by someone. They were using equipment, technology that was provisioned by someone. You were renting a car at an airport and you watched someone tap away at keys on a 1973 computer for what seemed like half an hour, going, how is this the 21st century? Well, someone made the decision not to upgrade that equipment. Someone decided that you should suffer that experience for 30 minutes when your flight was delayed and you just want to get to your destination and you're waiting for this car. Someone made the decision that caused that experience. Every single person in the business, finance, legal, HR, customer service, logistics, operations, supply chain, is either delivering an experience to a customer or they are creating the platform and the foundations and the working environment and the context in which that experience is delivered. We are all shaping our brands. And yes, some people you can sort of identify, so now bring it to 4 pillars, they're working on the tasting bench in Healesville. So when Sadhna turns up and gets told the 4 pillars story and gets told the story as if she's speaking to one of the owners and one of the founders, and actually it's someone who only joined 6 months ago, and they seem to have such passion and such conviction for the brand and the gin, and they can tell you all about the different styles and what's their favorite and teach you how to taste. You can absolutely see they are on the front line of brand building, but so are the people who trained them. So are the people who decided we're going to allocate 2 extra people to the tasting bench on busy days so we can do more intimate tastings, which means our HR team and our finance team, everyone is on the front line of brand building. So understanding where brand gets built, which experiences and which interactions are going to be of particular importance, where you need to sort of effectively meet customer expectations, and then which areas you're going to choose to wildly exceed them, because it's those moments of having our expectations shockingly exceeded. Those are the things we notice. Those are the things we give credit to. And then, of course, we notice the things that fall short of our expectations. So once you understand that as a business, everyone has to get behind making that possible. So everyone shapes the brand, influences the brands. It's why I'm a absolute zealot when it comes to this idea that your brand doesn't exist, or at least if it does exist, it doesn't belong just to the marketing team. It isn't just this tool that some people in marketing and brand building get to use. It's something that all of us need to understand, take responsibility for, and show up in support of every day.
And that experience, by the way, for tasting the gin is exactly as you described it. How do you keep your people passionate around this? I mean, you exude it, but you live the brand every single day. But how do you get the person who's doing the tasting on a Saturday or Sunday to actually live that every single day? I can hear that question being asked by leaders as they listen to this. How do I make my people believe it and do it?
That's a really hard question. The even harder question would have been answer without using the word authenticity.
Authenticity.
That would be really hard. So I'm probably just going to cheat because you didn't tell me not to. I'm probably going to say authenticity. It's hard to answer that question without talking about authenticity, because to some extent that is the key. I think when you walk into the Four Pillars Distillery in Healesville, when you walk into the Four Pillars Laboratory in Surrey Hills in Sydney, and you meet people who just exude a combination, I think, of passion and ownership. I think they exude those things because they are both present in them. They are both there. So let's start with passion. They're passionate about the gin. They're passionate about the gin experience because they believe in it, because we have built a brand around the fact that we make better gin, that we are makers, not marketers. We are selling truth to people. We are not spinning them fictions and lies. Like we really did hand weigh every botanical. We really did work that hard to make this gin so special. We really did go and distill beer and hops to evoke the sticky beer soaked carpets of that pub for that little small batch sticky carpet gin we made. We really did sort of interrogate our craft at every level. So when all of that is true, it is easier for people to show up as if that is true and stand in front of that. But equally, we've got to make sure that they experience it themselves. So at Four Pillars, we place huge emphasis on all of our people experiencing the things, experiencing the hospitality, enjoying the tastings and the drinks, getting to hear co-founders like my two co-founders, Stu and Cam, the incredible gin maker who's in two halls of fame, the World Gin Hall of Fame, the Australian Distilling Hall of Fame, Stu, who's in the Australian Distilling Hall of Fame. He was also president of the Australian Distillers Association. I'm currently in 0 halls of fame, and I'm working on it. But giving every single person in the business experience and access and hearing these people speak and learning from each other and getting to live that passion, because ultimately it's true. So if we put it on display, if we put our craft on display to our people, it's easier for them to put that on display for everyone they meet. I think the other side of it, I talked about ownership, and ownership is something that I suspect a lot of leaders listening to this wish more of their people had, that sense that I'm going to act like an owner. Most of the words we use, we sometimes forget where they come from. I talk about how it's only shockingly good experiences that move the needle on brand loyalty. Well, I mean the word shocking, remarkable because we would remark upon them to other people. We would go to work next day and say, you won't believe how good this was. These words have meaning. To talk about ownership, to talk about people behaving as if they're owners, it has meaning. It means they will not walk past a problem that they could fix. They will not leave until they are satisfied that that situation has been resolved. They will not leave an opportunity to delight a customer on the table. And we give people ownership. I'll tell you a really, really quick story. A couple of weeks ago, we announced this year's Australian Christmas gin label. So every year we make this wonderful Christmas gin the same way. We start with Cameron's mum's Christmas pudding recipe from the 1968 Woman's Weekly Christmas pullout. Cameron gets all his kids, and it used to be all of our kids when we get them together. They're all getting a bit older now, but we'd get all the kids, any children available, get them into the kitchen on Derby Day, the Saturday before Melbourne Cup. We'd make Christmas puddings. Cameron would go and distill the puddings, distill those pudding ingredients, and then age that distilled Christmas pudding gin in 100-year-old musket barrels. And the liquid, after 12 months, is this unbelievably indulgent gin that smells like gin, tastes like Christmas. It's fantastic. And I made the call right at the start to say, this is your tradition, Cameron. We want to make this a Four Pillars tradition. We want to make it an Australian tradition. Let's not put branding on the label. Let's wrap it in wrapping paper, and let's get the wrapping paper made by an Australian artist. So every year we commission a different Australian artist to come up with an original artwork that is their idea of Christmas, of Australian Christmas, of Christmas in the sun, that festive time, whatever it means to them, whether it's Tim Summerton and the flame trees in bloom, or whether it's Darren's song and there's all the Christmas Beatles out, whether it's Andrea Hewlin in Cairns and it's too hot to cook, so it's cold seafood and cold pavlova. And we have this amazing family of artwork labels that we've built up. So this year we announced this year's label. We made life really hard for ourselves. We commissioned a crochet artist called Trevor Smith. And so trying to put three-dimensional art on the two-dimensional label is hard, but I think the team have just done this beautiful job with the label on the gin, the label on the puddings that we make from the gin, the label, and then all the lovely artwork and content. Anyway, so we released this on Instagram, and very quickly we got a response back in the form of an Instagram story. And it was from a woman who had collected every single Christmas gin, except for the one Christmas gin launched when she was caring for a newborn baby, and she just missed that year. And so without asking anyone, without needing to ask permission from anyone, and without telling her, our social team, and it's all in-house, just immediately went, tracked down a library stock bottle of that Christmas gin from that year, put it in the post, and sent it to her to complete her collection. They have total autonomy. They are given total agency. People on the tasting bench, they're not given a script. They are invited to tell the Four Pillars story the way that makes sense to them after we have told them our stories. So they ingest, they take it in, they experience, they stand next to legends like Elton, one of our original tasting bench champions. His mum's now got her name on a still. Elton's mum, Linda, is on a still. Great employee retention policy, by the way. Once your mum's name's on a still,
You won't
very
go
hard to
anywhere.
leave. And so they take it all in, and then they play it back in their own way. And so I'd like to think that, of course, as you get bigger, that there have to be, whether it's financial or safety or legal, of course you have guidelines, of course you have parameters, of course you have to grow up a little bit. But as much as possible in every part of the business, people have this real sense of ownership and agency, that Four Pillars remains this freewheeling thing built on passion, built on craft. We are makers, not marketers. That means we make things that excite us. We make things that come from our mastery of process. You know, we launched in December 2013, and we said we'll only ever make gin. By March 2014, we're making marmalade. But not because we had reneged on that commitment to only make gin, but because Cameron was making this incredible gin using whole oranges. He was just sliced them in half. They would steam in the gin, and he hated throwing them away. And he was taking them home and making orange cakes. And he's like, you know what? I reckon these would make an amazing marmalade. And so within a month, we have gin steam marmalade. And I sort of call that our Made from Gin program. We'd say, okay, we're going to only ever make gin, but we're going to become the world's leading flavor sustainability champions. Every little bit, it's like nose to tail distilling. Every little bit of the gin making, if there's flavor left in it, we'll make something. So now we work with Olsen Salt and we make a gin salt. We work with Hunted and Gathered. We make a gin chocolate. We make marmalades and breakfast Negronis and relishes with Shiraz skins and all sorts of things. And so that spirit of Cameron just made it because he thought it was a good thing to make. We did it because we thought it was a good thing to do. We supported that charity because we think it's the right thing to do. We sent that woman that bottle of gin because completing her collection was the right thing to do. You and your family had a great time on the tasting bench and you said something. And so at the end, when you bought a couple of bottles of gin, we just slipped something in the bag as a little thank you, a little gift. You don't have to ask permission at Four Pillars to do those things. Instinctively, you know the right things to do because the business is fueled by story, by passion, by craft, and then you are given the agency to own that decision. So I think it's the combination of those two things that mean that everyone acts like an owner of the brand. It's not rocket science and it's not precision. It's a hard thing to coach, but I think those are probably the ingredients that we've invested in that have made it happen.
I think it also starts with great leadership as well, Matt. And, you know, just talking to you today, and we haven't met before this, but just talking to you today, I'm sure that if I spoke to people who work with you, they would say that a lot of what you've just said also starts with great leadership. Because I think if you live it and breathe it and you display it every day in your business, people will follow you and behave in the way and act in the way with the brand, as you say they do. So congratulations to you and your founders on what you've achieved in such a short period of time.
No, thank you. And I would like to reflect on just really quickly on that notion of leadership, it's some lovely words you said there, and thank you for them. But I think one of the really magical things about the leadership model was also the trio. And I think the interesting thing about the leadership trio is we were remarkably functional. I mean, of course, we disagreed on lots of stuff, but we rarely fell out. We rarely had sort of unbridgeable divides between us. And in having these sort of low-level tensions, you sort of modeled the right way for Four Pillars to think. So Cameron would make sure that we never, ever lost sight of the fact that the gin was everything. And so when we started to talk in 2020, 2021 about whether we would make ready-to-drink gins and tonics and sort of putting our gin in cans and catering to this incredibly fast-growing audience who wanted a world-class Australian gin and tonic, but didn't want to have to take a bottle to a picnic and wanted to be able to take some cans. So Cameron would make sure that the quality, that the product was everything. Stu would then make sure that we were staying really close to what the trade wanted, to what commercial success would look like, that we were on strategy from a growth point of view. And I would make sure that every decision we made kept the promise the brand was making and reinforced that. And every aspect of it, from the story to the design, the aesthetics, the experience, was really well crafted into Four Pillar standards. And so when people could see the trio thinking and talking and working these things through, you were also modeling these ways that everyone needed to think. So when you're then at your level thinking about the website or thinking about the distillery door or whatever, you could almost sort of go, okay, well, what would Cam say? Well, Cam would be happy with that, but what would Stu say, or what would Matt say? And in a way, we modeled the tensions, because I think maybe the last thing I'll say on this podcast, I think as leaders, something that we're always trying to do is create clarity. It's one of the places that you and I started today. But we're trying to create clarity in a world that is ambiguous. And so one of the things we need to teach people to do is how to turn their localized version of ambiguity into clarity, to go, there's a lot going on here, and there's a few different things to consider, and multiple things can be true at once, but I can only ultimately do one thing. And so as leaders, giving people the tools, modeling the ways of thinking that help to turn that ambiguity into clarity and into a decision that they can own with conviction and passion, I think it's critical. And I think we were really fortunate in the trio that we built that allowed us to do that.
Matt Jones, thank you for your time. You've actually reminded me I need to go down and visit the Hillsville shop and buy my Christmas presents for this year, and the Christmas gin. I'm one of the people that buys a Christmas gin every year as well. I do love them. And then I spend a whole year drinking it. I will ask you one last question before I let you go. What's next for Four Pillars?
Look, I think the Four Pillars job is only half done. We set out to be the benchmark for craft gin at scale. We never thought that craft had to be small. We always thought craft was about quality and a way of being and a way of doing things. And you could scale it. It's just hard to scale. But just because it's hard doesn't mean you can't do it. We have become a really strong player in Australia, but there are still plenty of people with $70, $80 in their pocket, and they'll spend that on gin, but they still haven't really gone down the Four Pillars rabbit hole and tasted Rare Dry and tasted Blaze Shiraz. So we've got to keep chasing those people in the right ways, in Four Pillars ways. But also we're in 30 markets worldwide, but we are not a big brand in those other 29 markets. And so getting Four Pillars to the size that the liquid deserves, doing justice to the gin in airports, in duty free, in the great cities of the world, the great bar cultures of the world, and then growing out from there, particularly I'd say in our home backyard of Southeast Asia. I think there's still a great job to do. It's why I remain involved. I still consult to the business. It still fuels me with passion. I think we've built incredible foundations. We've built the first story of the house. It's not going anywhere. The beautiful homes, we've got the incredible team, the commitment to placing the gin and the craft above everything. But I think we can put a few more stories on the house over the next few years.
Well, good luck with that. And the Shiraz is my favorite. Thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Sadhna. It's been a great chat.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.